Welcome to the Invincible Innovation Show, the podcast for changemakers. Each week, I talk to the most fascinating entrepreneurs and innovation leaders about innovation, strategy, and design. Hey everyone, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Invincible Innovation Live Show. I'm your host, Adima Zokario, product design and AI expert, and today we have two incredible guests who are revolutionizing the world of artificial intelligence. They are young entrepreneurs who have developed an open source tool that allows people to adopt generative AI models without need for extensive AI expertise. We're going to dive deep into the fascinating world of generative AI. And hi, Ariel and Itay.
Hey,
Great,
hello.
great to see you too. It's a very exciting time for me to have both of you in my show. And Itay Elgazr and Ariel Weinberger are founders of Pezzo. Pezzo is empowering teams to develop and deliver state-of-the-art AI with confidence and deliver impactful AI-driven software in minutes. Wow.
That's
We're live on
correct.
LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and you're so invited to join the discussion and ask questions. And let's dive into the discussion. So before we start all the small details of what you're doing, and we have listeners who might not really understand what is generative AI and how is it different from traditional AI models.
Cool. Um, maybe I can start and say, first of all, very happy to be here. Thank you for everyone who's watching, and also thank you to everyone who's watching or listening in retrospect. Um, I think what's cool about maybe I'm gonna explain generative AI for non-experts because that's essentially what we do at
Yeah,
Pezzo. Um, so think of generative AI as some AI models that can generate stuff, right? That's a pretty simple way to put it.
yeah,
At the end of the day, AI models that have been trained on very big data sets, billions of parameters that are at your fingertip with an API call away, as we say it. And you're just able to generate things with them, whether it's text, video, images, um, or any other thing that can be generated. Um,
yeah.
that's the gist.
Yeah. So how is it different from traditional AI? An AI is a model that will bring you answers, that will bring you calculations, analysis, predictions. How is it different?
I'm not personally sure about the official definition, but I would say when I consume generative AI, I don't take part in the training aspect, for example. All I do is I send a request and the response that I get is a generation of whatever result, whether I ask the question or ask to generate an image. I don't take part in the full cycle of like getting the data, training the model, and then rolling it out and then querying it. So I think that is the most major difference.
Yeah. And for the end users, it actually says that there is this very smart machine, whatever, that you would ask something and you would get an answer in text or in an image or in a video or in an audio file, whatever. So you would ask her to create or generate something for you. And it's not part of a general, like a very sophisticated calculation that we have in a part of the software that we're using.
And I think that's one of the most interesting things that at the end of the day, it's a capability, and it's up to us to decide what we do with it. Do we just do one simple thing? Do we go back and forth? Do we take text and then turn it into an image? And what's so fascinating about these times in tech is seeing what is possible with generative AI, and people are being
Yeah,
extremely
yeah,
creative so far. So
Right,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
So
It's so
give me
fun.
like a few examples. Itai, could you give me a few examples of people who
Yeah.
don't understand what generative AI, other than ChatGPT? Give me another example.
I mean, it's all up to, you write prompt and you accept it to give you something, whatever. It could be really anything. So people are starting to realize that. So I will give you a proper example because we are software engineers. We've never been to, like, me and Ariel, for example. We never did anything around AI. And so when we heard about ChatGPT and all these kind of things, we really understand that we just got superpower and we don't really need to understand anything behind it. We just know that given a simple prompt, we can get a simple text. And so the possibilities are really endless. But for example, when we started, investigating it, first of all, like everyone, we started with ChatGPT. But really, like quickly we realized that we can do anything around it. So we created Resumator. So this was like our first, our first project, just to understand how AI works. And what we did is we gave people the possibility to give to add your resume, and we will tailor it for you, or we will generate a cover letter for you based on your resume. So this is like powerful. You don't need to do anything. You're the user. You just upload your resume. We will just and it will generate a really tailored cover letter for you based on your resume. And then later we added you can even add your job description, and you'll even generate a more tailored version of that cover letter. So yeah, that's really that's how we started
Mhm.
to to play around it.
Yeah. So actually, it's like a power that you could have like a very I don't know, an expert, a very good friend, a very good coder next to you, and he would
Yeah,
help you whatever you want. So you give like an example of like writing a resume that most people will at least a few times in their lives would need that,
yeah,
and then they would start to say, okay, but in this job it needs to be a tweak to that direction, and the AI could just write it in perfect English. We're all from Israel originally. And then it's like it's this exact thing that the person on the other side wants to hear, right?
I think
So,
it's really about like giving the edge. If you think about it, if we take the example that Ita has talked about, before we started Pezzo, we were working on that side project Resumator that Ita just described.
mhm,
And you know, at the end of the day, anyone technically is able to do that, right? Anyone is able to apply for a job,
yeah,
get a job description, sit down, open up Word or Google Docs, and make adjustments to their resume or to their cover letter to be more personalized.
right.
But with AI and software, it's done automatically for you. And I think it always kind of boils down to AI is not likely to like replace you, but those who know how to utilize it are going to
yeah,
have the edge. And this is a good example. I think at the end of the day, if you're not fit for the job, you're not going to get the job, right? But if you click a few buttons, then you might at least land an interview, and that's where most people fail.
Yeah.
you
and
can
and
level up.
what
Yeah,
Yeah, sure. And we gave an example for someone looking a job, and what you're doing right now with Pezzo is for developers that would like to utilize this capability from ChatGPT and other. Do you have like Bard as part of it? Like, what kind of APIs do you have, or would you have? You don't have to have all of them right now.
Itai, feel free to go
sorry,
ahead.
but yeah, sure, sure. Yeah, so basically what we do is we enable teams to to start utilizing prompts, and like we basically enable AI in companies. And what we do is when we started with generative AI, so for example at Resumator, we really noticed a lot of problems, a lot of issues, a lot of pains. And one of them, for example, was around observability.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah, Ariel, would you
yeah,
continue?
I'm gonna go
The
ahead.
thought. So
So
I'm
we,
sure
we
you
know
will
we
continue
noticed
first.
sorry for that. We noticed a few pains, and we noticed that while we're working on generative AI, we have no idea what happens. Where do things go? What is a good prompt? What is a bad prompt? What converts users and what doesn't? And that was quite painful for us in the sense that we weren't sure. Um, are we doing things right? Like at some point, and very very early on in the process when building Resumator, we felt like we're walking on eggshells because we want the best for our users, but to do that we have to iterate over our AI prompts when we had like 20, right?
Yeah.
It's never that simple. It's never as simple as one single prompt that you use.
Yeah.
But we
Just
realized that
just
as we
to
make
just to explain, a prompt is the request. It's like the sentence that or a paragraph that you write in order to get the answer from the machine, whatever it is.
yeah, it's the
Yeah.
instruction basically, and
Yeah.
prompts in the case of ChatGPT is just a piece of text that you provide. But in other like for example, Journey, where you generate images, prompts can be a bit more advance the data and accept parameters as well, like the image quality and the resolution and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, prompts are basically like I would say maybe an atomic operation against an AI generative AI model. But basically, we realize if things go wrong, I don't know where, when, or why. I'm not able to. Most of those things are like when you design your prompts, you make assumptions. You take we're not again AI engineers. We don't have billions of parameters to test against. But what we essentially do is we would make some assumptions, take somebody's resumes, take somebody's I don't know different versions, different layouts, and try to test that in our stack and hope that the result goes well. But that really didn't work out. So then you go to production, you get thousands of users using you, and you realize, all right, the input is totally different, the language is totally different, the format is totally different, and how do we deal with that? And that is the observability aspect of Pezzo that we're fixing by giving you a single place with a very high level overview of what's going on, what are the inputs, what are the outputs, did it convert? We're kind of closing the loop with your analytics platform. And then the next step is to automatically make your prompts better and more powerful, because if we know what converts for you, then we're able to automatically make your prompts better and better, cheaper, more efficient, faster, and just yield a better result without you having to focus on it. And that's the key here. We want people who are traditional developers to not have to become AI expertise, because that's like the full stack revolution. That's how we see it.
Yeah. Yeah. So Itai is back. Hi, how are you? We don't hear you. You're
Sorry.
muted.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry. My
yeah. So
computer got
there are
stuck.
like
Sorry.
technical issues. This is what's
Yeah.
going on when it's all live, and it's fine.
Yeah.
I'm used to it.
We should
Once
have
I
been
had,
together sooner.
once I had someone, and I was in the middle of discussion, and then the electricity fell, and he was like left there alone for about 2 minutes or something. So what can we do?
The things that
So
AI cannot fix.
yeah.
No, it cannot.
So just thinking about what could be done in order to create these like AI applications, but as I see it, there are like three options, and of course you could fix me. One would be, as you say, like utilizing existing models like ChatGPT, Bard, Midjourney for visuals and so forth. The second one would be using open source models, okay, like
Yeah.
whatever that there are around, and open source data sets and so forth. And the last one would be to build a generative engine, like to be a competitors for OpenAI and data sets. So what would be the pros and cons for each one of these options as you see it?
All right. Let's start with the last. The last one is competing with OpenAI. I think there is a few challenges here. First of all, it's the expertise. You need to be not just an AI machine learning expert in the sense of like retraining or it's essentially getting the data, getting the compute, having the right culture for it, having the right, in some cases, regulatory aspects that are nailed down depending on the market that you're targeting. It's a huge operation, I think, and I might be slightly wrong, but I think a training run for GPT 3.5 cost around $1 million, if I read that correctly. And I think that's out of reach for a lot of folks. And to be frank, I mean, unless your business is purely AI, I don't see why you would want to do that. That's why we
Very
have
expensive. Yeah.
providers.
It's very, very
Expensive in
expensive.
every aspect.
Yeah. And I heard that Microsoft said that using like delivering OpenAI capabilities, ChatGPT for capabilities would be 700,000 US dollars per day just for the usage of the electricity and the computational power and all of the services related to that for one day. So I think that most companies
Yeah.
would not have that right now.
Yeah, it's just expensive, and the thing is that OpenAI and these kind of companies, they just make it cheaper for you. You don't need to care about the cost. Like really, the cost is really it's yeah, it's
It's
nothing.
huge. Yeah,
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 it's like too much. So we said, okay, we're not going to build a competitor for OpenAI. So the two other options would be open source or using these like giant models that we all know.
Cool. Maybe I'll talk about open source, and Ita, you can talk a bit more about the other models. The thing about open source is it could be great. I think we're going to see a lot more of that actually, because the main issue with open source models is not that the models are not good. It's about, again, operation. And cloud providers are starting to, you know, cloud provider are starting to, provide you with an easy and convenient way to kind of take up a model that is open source and spin it up on a cloud provider. So I think Bedrock is doing that on AWS, and you would have many other providers and solutions that are going to allow you to do that. So if you're a business and you care, for example, you're extremely compliant, you're doing health or biotech or stuff like that, and you strictly cannot allow for any data to escape or take the risk of leakage or people training on your data and stuff like that, then there are many open source models that are actually really great. So I think the more it will become affordable and easy and accessible to kind of deploy a model, have it in your own private cloud, within the whatever your network and your regulatory boundaries. That would be, I think, something that we're going to see a lot of, because people are worried. We're talking to a lot of companies, and right now they kind of are doubting which provider to choose, and they get to the point of compromising on the quality of the output because of where the data is stored, because they don't know, or they do know whether their IP or customer information is used for training and stuff like that. So I think that's the major thing with open source. I think history has told us that open source is a great thing, and a lot of companies eventually, Kubernetes, Kafka, Postgres, Mongo, they're open source, and they're the go-to solutions for their space. And I think, based on history, I think that's where we'll be heading. And then there will be open AI and Azure AI for those who just want to make an API call and take advantage of it.
So I just, like, for people who are not really aware of the technical part, when you're using ChatGPT, you need to call ChatGPT, and you get requests and answers from the machine that is like stored somewhere in the cloud. And if you want to use your own data, it might be a problem. There might be problems with your privacy, legal. It could be open for risk. You might say, okay, my data is available for usage for my competitors if the machine is better, so forth. So you want to keep your privacy and your state like in your side, and you want it to be secured. And therefore you say, okay, I want to have this instance somewhere in the cloud, this model that I can control. And then you could have an open source, and then you could locate it in, I know, AWS or some kind of cloud service, and then use it. And then you need to pay, of course, this cloud provider, as we mentioned, like it could be very costly in order to do so.
Yeah.
Right?
I think
So
boundaries and moderation and this kind of stuff are also important, because these, at the end of the day, something like OpenAI was built to, essentially they want to give you the answer always. Like they want you to be a happy user, and many times the answer is, they will not go to the extremes, and extremes sometimes might be a bad truth. So if you're doing medicine and you need generative AI to tell you something that is a bit less comfortable, or make a decision that has a lot of responsibility involved in it, these common models are just not made for that. They're made to be very safe, very politically correct, very, kind of tell you what you want to hear in a very kind way. And at the end of the day, in some applications, those that make decisions on important things, you need to have that restriction out of the way. And I think these are the ones that are going to have to go through other more exotic models, and perhaps self-hosted models or cloud-hosted models and this kind of stuff.
Yeah. And when you have this own model, you could use your own data. That's one thing, that it's like I'm taking all my database and using this model in order to optimize or to get better answers. And I could add and customize it as I want to my needs. So what is the difference in customizing what you're doing, ChatGPT, for example, and customizing my own open source? I would not open the model itself and start to change it, right? Because that's the power of the model. So what's the difference in customizations?
You mean the difference in customizing? So ChatGPT cannot be customized, right? We can give it instructions.
Yeah.
We can say, given this information, consider this, and that, and do not do this under any condition. And oftentimes what you typically do in training, you would just provide as additional instructions to prompts or to
Mhm.
requests. And
Mhm.
yeah, when you have full control of the model and you're able to train it or pre-train it or for example reinforce it, then you don't have to do that, and you can kind of
Mhm.
change the way it fundamentally works, if that makes sense.
So what you're saying that only in the cases that I'm an insurer, a medical service, or something which is very specific, it needs to be very precise. It makes sense for sure that I would use an open source. In other cases, maybe I would use open source, and maybe I would prefer to use ChatGPT. That's what you're saying.
I would say yeah, sort of. So to put it simply, yeah, because I think every business and its own kind of regulation needs. At the end of the day, it boils down to take a few models, test them, consider the cost of operation, consider how many users you have. It might be great for you to run an expensive model if you're a boutique company that does something expensive but at a small scale, for example. Really typical
Mhm.
business decisions and picking a technology, no different than others in that
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, so we talked about the advantages of each of these options, and we talked about disadvantages. For example, we talked about security and privacy. Is there anything else? A person who say, okay, I'm going to use ChatGPT in order to build my application. Is it problem for funding? They would say, okay, you're using a third party, it's not yours. Everybody could build this, or is it a problem when they change the model and you don't have any control over it? What would be a disadvantage of using these models?
Go ahead, Itai.
Oh, you don't see Itay again. We have some technical problems.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
see. All right.
Okay.
So I'm gonna take this one. So you I think you asked again if it's gonna cause some problems for founders, for example, deciding to utilize generative AI and then using some either open source models or stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um,
And the
and is
same
it
would
gonna
be
cause an issue?
for an enterprise. So they have their
Right.
own like a competition, our data, our customers. So it's like other things that they take in mind.
I would say, there's a few things, there's a few aspects. The first one is what data am I dealing with? If I'm dealing with customer data, I might not. So, for example, OpenAI's policy is they don't clearly tell you what they do or not do with your data. For example, when you use ChatGPT, you don't have a guarantee that your data that you provide to it will not be used for training purposes or for other stuff like that. Um, but there's other models, like for example, Azure AI, which is essentially like OpenAI but packed differently and served with Microsoft, that has the Microsoft stamp and stuff like that. Then in that case, you can have much more confidence in what's going to happen with your data, because you get a guarantee, because Microsoft has compliance, that your data will only be used within your domain, within your call it tenant or whatever, and not used to train or work on any other kind of uh, benefit of another tenant or another provider or data share.
Yeah.
I would say these are the things that you have to think about. ChatGPT, um, you know and that's kind of the baseline of like enterprise or any business choosing technology. But then there's the other layer, which is sort of one of the things that we help with at Pezzo, is how you can use these powerful, cheap, readily available models, but still do it right without infringing your IP or affecting your customer data. And in that case, what you can do is, for example, anonymize your user data or your IP when
Yeah.
you send it over. So, for example, if you have a prompt that involves somebody's first name, last name, and then a lot of other information that is really the core of decision making for the model, what you can do is just anonymize the first name and last name, send it over to the model, get it back, and then patch it back to kind of what it used to be. So there are very creative ways to dealing with that,
Yeah.
and
It's like
anonymizing data.
encryption. Anonymizing is like encryption, decryption of the data.
It would be even simpler than that. So imagine I take your resume, it has your name
Mhm.
on top, but
Sure.
everything else is really exactly the same. And that is what you make decision based on. So I could just
Yeah.
take your resume and change your name and call you, something anonymous, like, I don't know, Jane Doe or something like that, right? And
Yeah.
then it goes to the model, and then the model doesn't know about you. It doesn't know it's you, but it does know your education. It knows your work experience. It knows your certificates, the language that you speak, and then it comes back to you, and you can just change that, like in a very primitive way. Actually, it's super
Ah,
primitive. It's like text
yeah,
replacement. So that's one of the ways you can deal with it.
yeah,
Um, if you want to use those readily available models and you're
sure.
not certain about how they handle the data, that would be a good approach.
Yeah, I understand that. So, by the way, the name is very important. I heard about a research is saying that once you have like a female name, it's different than what you get in the result with the male name. So maybe
Wow,
you
I didn't
need
know.
yeah, it's a different, usually you get a different way of describing things when you're female. So maybe you
Mm.
need to take a name which is good for a male and female both. I don't know, like maybe we should
Yeah.
try. It's
And that's
interesting.
another thing, right? It's like, do you want to eliminate bias or not? And
Right.
I think that's like, um, that's like an interesting one. So do we eliminate bias in this way, for example? But on the other hand, maybe it's not that big of an issue, because for some application, having like 50% of the world's population is not significant enough. Like, it's not granular enough that it justifies um, anonymizing the gender as well. But some do. It also depends on the country. Sometimes you have to, because of
Yeah.
discriminatory acts and stuff like that. So it's really interesting. It's super complicated.
Yeah. So, what are the biggest challenges team faced while using generative AI in their development? So, we mentioned some of them. Could you tell me right now? It's only creating the right prompt, or there are
Oh, it's
like
a lot more than
version
that.
control, whatever.
It's a lot more than that. So let's start with the basics. First things first is that you wanna implement generative AI. So the first thing would be, how do I do that? What programming language do I use? Oftentimes, teams that are going to adopt generative AI have an existing programming language that they use, and they just want to utilize the power of generative AI. So most likely, their preference would be to stick to their existing language, whether it's Java or Python or JavaScript or TypeScript. So the first thing is to figure out, how do I interface with the model? What language do I use? Or maybe even before that, what model should I use? Everybody's now talking about OpenAI, but what about Azure AI? What about AI 21 Labs? What about Anthropic? And many, many, many others. You need to understand what is the right tool for you to use. And I think we haven't reached yet that point that enterprises, for example, I've worked for a very large biotech company. Um, when you make that decision, it becomes like such an essential piece of architecture and data flow, and where your customer data goes and where your IP goes, that you really have to spend the time to understand what model to use. One of the things we will allow you to do with Pezzo is to test your use cases against multiple models, right? So you could take, I don't
Yeah.
know, Anthropic, and you could take OpenAI and write your prompts and see what yields you better results, for instance.
Mhm.
Um, the next thing is the prompt design itself. I think what's interesting, I think prompt engineering is clearly becoming an actual, job. We
Right.
already see a lot of companies hiring for it in a
Yeah.
dedicated way. And at the end of the day, it does not require any coding. All you have to do to know is the input and the output that you expect, and then you can reinforce it. You can provide clear instructions, but you don't have to write a line of code to write a good prompt. So I think what we're going to see is an interesting shift where stakeholders, people who know a lot about the business, are going to be able to be somewhat at the spearhead of prompt design. And again, that's one of the things that Pezzo allows you to do. It allows anyone to design prompts without having to write a single line of code, and kind of bridging the gap between stakeholders and engineers. Um, so prompt engineering, how to do it right. And for us, it's also a challenge. We want to understand, how can we give you advice when you engineer prompts to make it more accurate, to make it cheaper. There are such silly mistakes that people sometimes make with prompt engineering, and I don't blame them for it, that can cost them 50% more in terms of AI consumption. And we've seen that many, many, many times. Um, and then the next thing is, how do you roll it out? So let's say you have a prompt. Let's say you have a prompt that is supposed to send a new user that signed up a welcome email with a coupon code, very personalized. You know their occupation, you know where they live, some user information. You should be able to personalize it, right? And you want to convert them into a paying user. but how do you make sure that you do it right? Did you factor in all of the inputs, all of the user data, all the different countries, different parameters and variables that might change with every user? How do you continuously evolve that? How do you roll out, okay, so it didn't work and I want to try again and I want to try something else, but maybe it didn't work for a certain user but would have worked for another user, but by rolling out a new version you actually changed it and made it worse, but you don't have enough information or data to make that right decision. So versioning, and that is a huge thing. Like, just like you do A/B tests with traditional software, you're going to have to do
Sure.
that with generative AI,
Of course,
rolling
and
it
in
out.
general, personalization is one of the most powerful thing you could have with the generative AI. Someone would get a different answer based on his specific needs and preferences.
Right. Exactly. And really, one of the major pains that's kind of funny, because as software engineers, in the past few years, we got into that continuous delivery mindset where we push a button, teams are super independent. Um, you make a small change in the UI or in your backend, and you can immediately roll out a release, A/B test, staging, production, and stuff like that. With generative AI, the amount of changes that you have to make on a daily basis to tune your very essential artery in your software suddenly, right? It happens a few times every day, and for teams, it does not make sense to make six releases per day, just to roll out a change in an AI prompt, because AI prompts are currently sitting in a code editor where nobody can collaborate with them. You have to create pull requests for engineers to review plain English. That does not make sense. Just like you don't do that with your emails, right? You store them at Twilio and SendGrid. So I think in terms of tooling, there's a lot to be done. And what we want to try and do in Pezzo is give you a central place where you can go in, you can manage your prompts, you can see what goes well, what goes wrong, you can see automatic suggestions, and you can instantly roll out versions to your AI prompt. You can make experiments, say 10% of users, say specific segment, and really allow you to just make sure you can adopt AI with confidence and not have to walk on eggshells. Make it fun, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and right now I think that most coders are used to writing software, which is different than
Mhm.
prompting.
Oh yeah.
And the way they see it is just to have this API, to write the API with this external third party. And usually it's one time. You don't rewrite the API each time you need to use the third party. But in that case, with generative AI, you need, as you mentioned, to make more and more changes each time, and it doesn't make sense in the way that usually people are building software.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. Because, and the testing aspect as well, right? When we roll out software, we have some unit tests, some end-to-end tests, some things that factually will tell us, does this thing work or not? I mean, you have background in UX, you have a lot of background in product. You know that I think the majority of software is not intelligent. It might be very complex. It might have some complex decision trees. Is the user from this country, or did they sign up 20 days ago? Then they should see this button and they click this and that should happen. It's might be very complicated, but um, you know, very doable to test this with very high confidence. With generative AI, I mean, you have no idea what you would get,
Yeah,
what would be the temperament of the AI model that you haven't discovered yet, given that particular input. So another thing that we're trying to do at Pezzo is to give you test suites, so that when you have a use case, you can define sample inputs and sample outputs, and every time you iterate, you think you are going to make the instructions better. We hope so too, but at least you'll know that you made it better rather than worse.
yeah. Another thing that is important in that aspect is like we treat this engine, this model, as a black box. We cannot control what's going on, but it is changing, right? So it's not like a very sophisticated one time structure that you could analyze and get, okay, usually I get this answer, but it's growing all the time, it's learning all the time, and then you get different output from it or input for your system from this third party all the time.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And I see a lot of angry people sometimes on Reddit. A new update has been rolled out to GPT-4. What's going on? It's not as good anymore. So, yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to see who's going to win.
What do you think? What's your bet?
My bet is that open source will win. Not
You know,
because I like open source.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious to hear your take on it.
No, I just read something yesterday because I'm always like, I'm on it. I'm creating a course for a AI, generative AI product. So I'm always like reading about it. And yesterday I read that the result for, I don't remember the name of the model itself, was better than ChatGPT 4. For the first time, an open source got a better result than ChatGPT, and it's a race. And I believe that there are more opportunities there. And I know that there was like this secret internal message from Google that they said we
Yeah,
don't have moat, whatever, and open source is after us, whatever. I think that it makes sense. That it should be open source, like even like
yeah.
morally, it should be there. And like Elon Musk said that when he I think invested, I don't know, like $100 million in OpenAI, it was when it was open, and he said it should be OpenAI, and I think he gave the name, or he said he gave the name, and it makes sense. It should be open, and therefore I hope that it will be this way.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I think it's inevitable that open source will win. Essentially, the only thing that is barring open source projects from really taking over, especially against competitors like Azure AI or OpenAI, is the access to compute and the access to data. I think data is something that eventually they will get around. I mean, it's just getting easier and easier and easier to get data. Platforms like Hugging Face and others, they make data so much more accessible, scraping and stuff like that. So that's the data aspect I'm not too worried about. The second thing is compute. I mean, just look what Apple did with processors in the past 2 3 years, since the M1 came out. Really, imagine what would happen in 5 years. Compute is so small these days and so powerful. But really, that's the only thing. These are things that you need money for,
Yeah,
um,
and I
which
know
traditionally
that.
with open source software you don't need that, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I know that, of course, NVIDIA and Microsoft and Apple, which sounds like very quiet right now about the AI, but
Mhm.
they're going to go for the hardware, of course. So all of them are working on chips and making it easier for machines to do these processes for generative and AI in general. So it's going to get there. They're working on it, so it's going to be there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I agree.
So how do you envision the future of generative AI impacting various industries?
I'm gonna start by saying that I'm not sure, because it would be silly of
Nobody
me, I
knows.
think. Exactly. I think it would be silly of me to speak with a lot of confidence in terms of what's going to happen with this extremely changing market, probably the most noisy market we've ever had. Um, and not necessarily in a bad or a good way, it's just what it is. So I think that generative AI will be a piece of every piece of software that is like, it will be a component in every piece of software that we consume, directly or indirectly. Whether it's like us going on a Wix website that is hosted by somebody that is a customer of Wix, render something, you make a decision, you file in a form, and maybe the person on the other end can get some more context about the intention based on analytics, kind of compose an interesting report of how likely that person is to convert, how interested they are. That's a simple example, but it will also be there in terms of like cloud SaaS, kind of APIs like HubSpot. If you're a customer of HubSpot, probably very soon you're going to be able to benefit from some
Yeah,
interesting
they already
insights or person.
created, I think, a generative AI is
There we
something
go.
in there. Yeah, I think.
There you go. So I'm not using it, unfortunately. I should, but I really think it's inevitable. And even if you didn't think about it, at the end of the day, if you're a business and you have competitors and they do think about it, then I'm not sure if FOMO is the right word, because I think it's very clear the value that you can get from generative AI. It's very, very dangerous as well if you don't do it right. I mean, you might actually cause some damage. But I think very quickly, platform tools such as Pezzo and others are going to help you with that. I think we're going to see it in every interaction, or at least every series of interactions, every visit to website, either behind the scenes where we don't see it, or whenever we actually click buttons and provide inputs. And I think it's going to become like a very powerful tool, um, that would be extremely affordable and a shame for businesses not to use, as long as they do it right.
And are you like, there are like two visions for AI in general? Okay,
One
one
where
would
we
be
all one where we all cease to exist, and the other one is harmony, right?
something something like that. One would be that this thing is going to be so powerful, more powerful than us, I guess, more or less. And the second one would be humanity is going to be saved, whatever all the problems would go, and we're going to use it in all the best ways available.
Um, yeah. Look, we just arrived at the moon. I think about 60 years ago, if I remember correctly, something like that. Uh, and yeah, we are advancing so fast that to be honest, I don't know. I don't know. I want to believe that we'll be able to do great things with it, but um, yeah, like regulation, for example, and things like that are a bit of a sensitive topic among recently I talked about like the new EU regulations for chargers and stuff like that. Even something like that was quite a loaded conversation, even though like it clearly is good for the environment and for consumers. But just when you talk about the term regulation, a lot of people, sometimes rightfully, sometimes in my opinion, right, not so much. I struggle to see um a clear understand like I started to get a clear understanding of where this will go in terms of like how do we limit this from, I don't want to say destroying us, because I think we won't just one day have a robot coming out of a factory and starting to, like, I don't know, destroy our places. I think it's gonna be gradual, and if something even close to that is gonna start to evolve, then we're gonna be able to catch it and kind of make sure it doesn't happen. um, we're not going to have an army of robots that are kind of landing from the moon in one day and taking over. Um, but yeah, I think it definitely is destructive. I mean, it's a lot of data, personal data, um, decision making in many cases, and I think the damage is not necessarily in harm, like bodily harm or stuff like that. It could be a lot of like indirect, like bad decision making that affects somebody's life um, without justice, right? So it's interesting, but I don't know exactly. All I can say is that I can clearly see that it's capable of causing damage.
Yeah. And the first thing that comes to most people in like what they think about is their job, right? It's like
Hmm.
obvious that generative AI could make the job, make the work of a photographer, poets, copywriting, marketing writing, anything related to creative in general, video, audio production, whatever. It's like, and it's doing it very, very well. So that would be the
Yeah.
first thing that most people would think about, like, am I safe in that aspect? And the answer would be no.
I have exactly the same unpopular opinion, because most people, I mean, honestly, every time I've heard like podcasts about generative AI and people talk about jobs being taken away, I hear the majority of time saying, no, it will not be taken. I have the unpopular opinion that I think some jobs will, like, so many people say it will not replace you, but you will start using it. I
Yeah,
think just being realistic and honest, my personal opinion is that a lot of people will have to force themselves to learn how to utilize AI, because at the end of the day, it's businesses who are going to decide. Um, if I have an ability to use a tool to automate something rather than let a person do it, um, I think the best is going to be like a mixture of both. But as humans, we have to make sure we upskill ourselves. We can do invent things, have our own kind of creative. I think creativity is like the most important aspect. Like that's something that to be honest, I don't think generative AI is that good at that. um Understanding customers needs, individual needs, and tailoring it to them in a creative way, not like a factual way. That is, I think, what people are gonna get paid for. But
yeah,
to say that the generative AI is not going to replace absolutely anybody's job, um, I'm not sure about that, and it's very sad. But I'm not sure if that's going to be the case.
yeah. I'm sure it is the case.
Yeah,
And you, as we just mentioned, prompt engineers, for example, in coding. So the new roles would come. And you mentioned that you should be very creative, and I think the word would be flexible. Because when I think about what people needs to learn in order to be better, like better people, like better humans, and have better futures, it doesn't have to be as like employees. Is to be flexible in a world which is changing so
yeah,
fast. One thing that we know about AI that it's really really fast.
yeah, yeah,
So
exactly, totally.
okay, we're almost done, and I'm very sorry that Itay is not with us because I wanted him to answer this one. So next time. So what's your number tip for entrepreneurs today?
My number one tip,
Yeah.
I would say, totally out of scope of generative AI. I mean, me and Itay are first-time founders. I would say build something that you have confidence in, but not in the sense that I'm so confident that what I'm doing is the right thing, but be confident in your ability to steer that thing. What we quickly learn working on Pezzo, especially in this noisy AI market, is that it's inevitable that as an entrepreneur, you're going to come with some assumptions, some of your own experience. Listen to your users, take their feedback very seriously, but also take it with a slight grain of salt. At the end of the day, you want to steer your own vision, but it's your job to factor in feedback from your users. And don't be overly or religious about what you're building now. Instead, focus on your ability to take feedback, factor it in, process it, and steer your expertise, your probably your TAM. All right, steer within your TAM and be agile, because sometimes you'd plan for something and then there will be a certain development coming from OpenAI in our case or something like that at first might seem like a competition, but then if you steer through it, you can actually see a huge opportunity. So just don't be too locked onto what you originally thought about when you're in the shower thinking about your great idea. Be more agile in that sense and steer your ship.
Yeah. Okay, that's a great idea, and I think that it's an insight about how you manage your life and not only your startup, right? It's like the way that you're open to new experiences, to new adventures, to new data coming in or inputs that you're getting, and not being like very sure, more humble, more flexible, more open-minded than like most people think about being an entrepreneur means that you're very stubborn and you know what you want and you're very like fixed on this like target. And sometimes they forget that in order to get to this target, you need to be so flexible and to go through all of the things that are related to being a startup in order to succeed. So I want first good luck with Pezzo and what you're doing, and I'm sure it sounds like a very good start. So I wish you the best of luck, and I want to thank you for being with me, and ask you how could people be connected to and hear about Pezzo and what you do.
Cool. So the first thing is happy to connect with anyone on LinkedIn. My name. It's Ariel Weinberger. Just really happy to. And if somebody has questions or doubts or comments, maybe you're disagreeing with me, feel free to just shoot me a message on LinkedIn. I really love having these kind of conversations. Pezzo, we're currently in closed beta. So if you go to our website, pezzo.ai, you're going to click join the waitlist, and you're going to fill in a very short form, and then we're going to send you an invitation. And in general, I think, and again, this is a sort of open invitation. If you have experience with generative AI, you've built things, you want to build things, you're not sure how to start, you're not sure how Pezzo can help you and if it can help you, feel free to just click that button on our website, and I'd be happy to have a chat with you. And make sure you're set to go.
Yeah, and Pezzo is with double Z.
Yeah, Pezzo is the double Z. It's like a piece in Italian because it's the missing piece in the AI landscape. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time. It's been very fascinating and insightful to talk to you and Itay. So thank you for being with me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It was an absolute pleasure for me too.
Thanks. And to all of you joining us today, remember to subscribe and share and leave your thoughts in the comment. And until next time, keep doing what you love. Goodbye, everyone. See ya.
Bye-bye.
I'm Adima Zaukario, and you've been listening to the Invincible Innovation Podcast. Make sure to visit our website, invincibleinnovation.com, where you can learn more about our programs and my book, Innovating Through Chaos. I'll be waiting for you next week in our next episode. Thank you for listening.